The pre-tribulation rapture and the Church of Philadelphia. We have another revelation, the revelation of the Church of Philadelphia and the open door. The Church of Philadelphia is what I call the first fruits church. It is the church that will be caught up in the pre-tribulation rapture. In the Old Testament, the fruit ready before the harvest at large was presented to God as a first fruits offering of the harvest to come. The church has been divided over their views on the rapture. Some believe the rapture is pre-tribulation. Some believe and teach a mid-tribulation rapture, and yet others that the rapture is certainly at the end of the tribulation. I'm here to tell you that they are all right. All three views will happen. There will be a rapture, a catching up to heaven before the tribulation. This will be the first fruits before the harvest at large. The Gentile saints that go into the tribulation or are saved during the tribulation will be caught up at the midway point of the tribulation. Thus, clearly you see in my messages in the book of Revelations that the majority of the church of Laodicea, goes into the tribulation to make herself ready. And they will be caught up at the midway point of the tribulation, thus a mid-tribulation rapture. And this will be before the great tribulation. Saints keep saying the church can't go into the tribulation because it's God's wrath. And they're not destined to God's wrath. But in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, they will be protected by God from Satan, as you see in my messages on the book of Revelation. But at the midway point of the tribulation, the great tribulation will start, and the church, the Gentile church at large, will be taken, caught up at the midway point of the tribulation, as you can see on my messages on the book of Revelation. Then, at that point, at the preaching, death, and resurrection of the two witnesses, the Jews will turn to their Christ, their Messiah, and the Antichrist will greatly persecute them until we return with Christ at the end of the tribulation, at the Battle of Armageddon. Those Jews still alive and not slain by the Antichrist must be changed. They must be caught up. Thus, all three views are clearly going to happen. A pre-tribulation rapture of the first fruits, those waiting, watching, ready, when they don't know he's coming. A mid-tribulation rapture of the church of the Gentiles at large, as they have made themselves ready for their marriage. And a rapture, a catching up at the end of the tribulation of those that are left and the Jews that have not been slain by the Antichrist. I'm here to tell you that all three of these views are right. There will be a rapture, a catching up of those waiting, watching, those not loving the world nor the things of the world, those not drunk, those not high, those that are not in love with this world, the things of this world and this life. As the Lord said in Matthew 24:42 through 44, therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. This can only be referring to him coming before the tribulation starts. For those that are waiting, watching, and dressed in readiness, the tribulation starts in 1 hour of 1 day at the fall of Babylon. And the days of the tribulation are numbered exactly. So this can only refer to him coming as a thief in the night, when no one expects him, before the tribulation. And in verse 43 we read, "But be sure of this, that if the head of the house," your leaders, your church leaders it's talking about here, "that if the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into." If church leaders knew the hour he was coming, they would tell you, warn you to be ready for that day and that hour. And they wouldn't allow their house to be broken into. They would warn you, it's coming at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Everybody would be at the church praying and ready and waiting. But he's coming as a thief in the night. But he is coming as that thief in the night. For those who are on the alert, who are always waiting and watching, even though they have no idea if he will even come in their lifetime, they still wait and watch. He's coming for them. This is the first fruits. These will go in the pre-tribulation rapture. And in verse 44 we read, "For this reason," saints, he says, "for this reason, you be ready too. For the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will." This can only be pre-tribulation. And if you look at my series on the book of Revelation, you'll see that there's hundreds of millions of Christians in the tribulation. It says it. It's clear. And hundreds of millions of people will get saved by those Christians preaching the gospel. Every time the Lord talks about his return, he says we must be ready, watching, not drunk. Or nowadays, it's just as likely to say not high. Marijuana, drugs are legal everywhere. Doctors have people doped up on these mind drugs and these feeling drugs. There's 80% of the drugs in the world are used by Americans. They're high on everything: prescription drugs, marijuana, wine, liquor, beer. He said we're not to be drunk, that we are not to be loving the world nor the things of the world. He is coming for those waiting, watching, those dressed in readiness. Look at my message on being dressed in readiness. It's very important that you hear that. For those dressed in readiness, he will take them to his Father's house for the wedding feast. In Hebrew weddings in those days, the groom would take his friends to his Father's house. In this circumstance, with the church to heaven, the groom takes his friends to heaven before the wedding, before the marriage supper. Saints, it's been right there all the time. They are the same. The wedding supper and the marriage supper are not the same thing. Look it up. And they never have been. The groom took his friends to his Father's house for a wedding feast, which was before the actual wedding, which was a supper. The marriage supper. This will be the marriage supper of the Lamb. But before it, he took his friends to his Father's house. That's the pre-tribulation rapture. In the Old Testament, as the harvest at large was nearing, the fruits that were ready early, before the harvest at large, were brought before God as a first fruits offering. We grow a lot of our own vegetables. And if you grow some of your own food, you know suddenly there's some fruit that is ripe and ready to be picked, while at the Harvest at large is not even close. This is what was presented to God as the harvest was nearing. The first fruits, the ones that were ready, in our case, those that are waiting, watching, dressed in readiness, they were taken and presented to God as a first fruits offering. This you see in him taking his friends to heaven, to God, to his Father's house for a wedding feast before the marriage supper, because the bride has to make herself ready. In the message to the church of Philadelphia, you see the Lord's message to those ready and waiting for his return. Those who will be caught up in the pre-tribulation rapture. He has nothing bad to say about the church of Philadelphia. Raptured means simply to be caught up. In the Bible, rapture is referring to someone being caught up to heaven. In the Bible, being caught up to heaven is not a one-time event. In Genesis 5:24 we read, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." In 2 Kings 2:11 we read, "And Elijah went up by a whirlwind to heaven." Enoch was caught up, raptured. Elijah was. The Lord was. Paul was. John was in the book of Revelation. Being raptured is not and never has been in the Bible a one-time event. You're being misled on that. The Lord said to the church at Philadelphia in Revelation chapter 3, verse 7, that he had the keys of David, and that he is one who opens and no one shuts, and who shuts and no one opens. In Matthew, and referring to the end time, he says in Matthew 24:37, "For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah." And in verse 39, "And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away." If you read the story of Noah in Genesis, you will see that Noah entered the ark and that God shut the door. Once the flood came, no one else was allowed in. The door was shut by God. You also read in the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25:10 and 11, that the door was shut. And later, remember that after Noah entered the ark, that God shut the door. And that days later, the flood came. Concerning the parable of the 10 virgins, I have another message on the entire parable that's very important that you listen to and understand. For now, if the Lord opens a door, for you it is open. If he shuts a door, it is shut. And he said to be awake, ready, alert, because once the door is shut, it is shut. He said to the church of Philadelphia in verse 8, "Behold, I have put before you an open door." It's the door to the wedding feast, saints. The groom would take his friends to his Father's house, and the door would be shut, and no other people, friends, neighbors were allowed in. Once that wedding feast started, the groom, his friends, and the groom's father waited, concealed in that room, until the bride made herself ready. Do you see that in the end times? The pre-tribulation rapture, and then the bride as a whole that's not ready, making herself ready? The door was open. And once it's shut, no one opens it. And only to this church, the Church of Philadelphia, does he make this statement, saints. I will write upon him the name of my God. And at the end of this verse, and I will write upon him my new name. He says to the Church of Philadelphia, I will write upon them the name of my God and my new name. The message to Philadelphia is the message to those who will be caught up before the tribulation. Because in verse 10 he says, because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I also will keep you from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come upon the whole world to test those who dwell upon the earth. He will keep them from the tribulation, it's saying, because they have a little power, he said, because they don't deny his name. He has this open door, and he says to them, I'm going to keep you from that hour of testing. I'm going to keep you from the tribulation. He doesn't say that to any other church. And you might think, oh, well, this is at the end. No, the last church is the church of Laodicea, and he has not one good thing to say about them. The last church, the church of Laodicea, he has nothing good to say about them at all. He says in Revelations 3:16 to them that he will spit them out of his mouth. It means to vomit. Does that sound like all the church being raptured before the tribulation? No. I will vomit you out of my mouth. Why would he say that to Laodicea, the last church? Because they're not ready. Philadelphia was ready and waiting. He took them. The ones that are left are not ready, not dressed for the wedding. He says, I'll vomit you out of my mouth. That's not rapture. Those waiting, watching, ready will have that door opened by the Lord, as seen in Philadelphia. Those left, Laodicea, will go into the first 3.5 years of the tribulation as they prepare themselves for their wedding. And you see in Revelations 19:7, read Revelations 19:7, deep into the tribulation, near the end of the tribulation. What does it say? Let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready. Saints, pray that God will open your eyes, open your ears, open your mind. It's laying right there. But very few see it, and many are taught the wrong thing. This time period is clearly not before the tribulation. And the bride, it says, has made herself ready. Listen to that, saints. It said the bride made herself ready. There will be a pre-tribulation rapture as seen in the Church of Philadelphia. But for those not ready, the door will be shut as the groom takes his friends to his father's house for a wedding feast, as the bride makes herself ready for the marriage supper. As he told Laodicea in verses 17 and 18, you do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. She's not dressed for her wedding. She's naked. If she's wearing anything, it's the clothes of Egypt and Babylon. What terrible things. This is the end times church. Did you read it? You do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. And in verse 18, that you may clothe yourself, and that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed. That's what's going to happen in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation for those that weren't ready and watching. They're going to clothe themselves. They're going to get dressed for a wedding. They're going to get prepared. Please listen to my messages on the Church of Philadelphia and the Church of Laodicea to fully understand this. I have whole messages on those too. In closing, in Revelation chapter 14, we read about these first fruits. I'm not making it up. In Revelation chapter 14, you read about the first fruits. They are singing a new song, and harpists are playing. And it says in Revelation 14:4, these are the ones have been purchased from amongst men. These have been purchased from amongst men. Listen, saints, as first fruits to God and to the Lamb. These are the first fruits. They're purchased from amongst men by the blood of Christ. They're ready. They're presented before God as first fruits offering of the harvest at a large that's coming, in the bride preparing herself and getting dressed. What else do we read about these first fruits? In Revelation 14:1, we read that they have his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. The only place we have seen this up until this point is concerning the overcomers in Philadelphia. Revelation 3:12. What does it say about the overcomers in the Church of Philadelphia? Those he will keep from that hour of testing. Those that have that door open. What does it say? I will write upon him the name of my God, the name of the city of my God, and going down further, and my new name. It's Philadelphia. And the first fruits, they're the same. They're the same ones. This is the only 2 times up until this point that this has been said. These ones ready and watching, he said he'll write the name of his God and his name on them. Here, this first fruits that's presented before God have his Father's name and his name on their foreheads. Do you see it, saints? Ask God to open your eyes. Thus, the first fruits are those that are waiting, watching, dressed in readiness. Those caught up in the pre-tribulation rapture, those are the first fruits. Those ready, waiting, watching. Then Laodicea, the ones that are left that weren't ready, weren't watching, will go into the first half of the tribulation. As she gets clothed and prepared for the marriage supper of the Lamb, she will prepare for her wedding finally. My next message will be the 3 messages that the saints will preach for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. My next message will be that Laodicea that goes into the tribulation. She will have 3 messages to preach as she prepares herself, dresses herself for her wedding. That is 3 angels with 3 messages. The work, the message for Laodicea and those saved during the tribulation as they prepare for the marriage supper of the Lamb. They will have these 3 messages. As they get dressed and ready for their wedding, they will be prepared. They're not now. Most of the church is mixed with the world and loving the world and high and drunk and on legal drugs and illegal drugs, or just busy buying, selling, trading, like it says with Noah, marrying, giving in marriage. They're doing everything. Every time they pray, it's for things on this world. It's for things in this life. We need to set our minds, set our hearts on the things of God, on the things above, and prepare and pray for his coming, to be ready, to be watching, to be waiting.